Wait a minute. Who am I here? Jerry Blake. Thank you, honey.
When the slasher movie boom was dying down in the late 80s, writers were looking for something different to capitalize on, and a lot of creators went with the true story angle. The Stepfather was brought to production by Carolyn Lefcourt, Brian Garfield, and Donald Westlake after reading about the true story of mild-mannered John List, who killed his whole family and wrote an admission letter before vanishing into the ether. The series and its remake would ironically fall into the slasher genre, with every entry after the first one, and not a lot of people realized it was a true story until a couple years after the film's release, when John List was caught and imprisoned. The movie is a classic that garnered good reviews from both critics and audiences, but how accurate is the film to real life? Make sure you do your background checks on those closest to you as we find out what the f*** really happened to the Stepfather. Oscar-nominated writer Donald Westlake made a name for himself by adapting gritty crime novels into successful and gritty crime films. Movies like Point Break and The Split from the late 60s were popular then and have garnered cult status to today's audience, but he also wrote for TV and gave us a scattering of comedies. After 1983's cleverly named Slayground and 1984's The Twin weren't as successful as previous scripts, Westlake was looking for something different. While most comfortable adapting crime novels, Westlake came across a story that was a true crime, but a whole lot darker than the thief or revenge stories he was used to. Co-writers Lefcourt and Garfield brought a newspaper article written about as of yet still on the loose murderer John List, and it inspired Westlake to write a screenplay based on the loose outline of List's crime, as well as what may have happened after. While it could be argued that the film was a thriller more than a horror movie, what List did was undoubtedly horrifying, and the film expanded upon his already awful deed. Terry O'Quinn plays the lead role as calm, terrifying, kind, and crazy all at the same time, while the entire story plays out in more frightening ways. The film is scary, but how close does it hew towards reality? The movie starts out with Henry, no relation to our last real-life killer, washing the blood from his hands and face before removing his clothing, shaving his beard, and walking past the remains of his murdered family. He leaves the house and locks the door before getting on a boat and throwing away a suitcase that had ties to his now former life. Okay, there's quite a lot to unpack here. John List lived a long life with his wife and children before deciding to murder them all after what amounted to financial stress combined with what he said was pressured marriage and family life. In the movie adaptation, the family of Henry Morrison is already dead, and he's just cleaning up himself and walking out of that life to move on to another perfect family. The writers decided to give Morrison the compulsive need to find the perfect family life as he moves from family to family, killing those he deems unfit to stay together. What the real John List did was wait until his kids went to school before brutally murdering his wife after she finished her morning coffee. From there, he went upstairs to tell his mother that the noise she heard was nothing important before killing her shortly after that. He then waited for his daughter and youngest son to come home from school, where he proceeded to kill them quickly with shots to the back of their heads. What happened after was even more disturbing and falls under the category of you just can't make this up. List then went to his older son's soccer practice to watch and then take him home to kill him as well, and he laid all of his family in the den on sleeping bags. Movie character Henry Morrison then moved on and within a year had changed his name to Jerry Blake, posing as a real estate agent before marrying again, this time to a woman named Susan who already has a daughter named Stephanie. The movie follows the trope of the stepchild not liking or trusting the stepparent and acting out because of it. The brother of the murdered wife brings up the crime again in the newspapers, and although a year has passed, Jerry still feels like Henry could come back to bite him. While it is true that List moved on to a new town within a year, traveling from New Jersey to Michigan and finally Colorado, where he took the name Bob Clark, who was a friend from college. While he did eventually marry again, it wasn't until 1985, a full 14 years after the original murders, and it was to a woman named Dolores Miller who had no children, nor did she and List have any. Jerry goes a little crazy after mail comes for his stepdaughter that could possibly incriminate him. It shows how he looked when he assumed the identity of Henry, and really, it's just him with glasses and a beard. The brother discovers that Henry Morrison doesn't really exist. The police figured out that he's probably jumped from family to family, living a happy life, until something upsets the status quo where he snaps, kills them, and then finds a new family. John List was a one-family person for most of his life, rather than a serial killer. List was deeply religious and even taught Sunday school just like his Lutheran father before him. List worked as a banker and was married to his wife Helen for 20 years before completely snapping and killing everyone. The troubles List experienced had to do with money and feeling trapped in his marriage, rather than a crazed sense of the perfect family. One of the truly sad parts of the whole ordeal was that there was a Tiffany chandelier in the house that was valued at over $100,000. While there's no way to know for sure, that money could have saved his wife, mother, and 3 children from grisly deaths. Back to the movie, and the police tell the brother that he wouldn't be out of his mind if he went and killed Henry because of what he did. Stephanie's psychologist wants to help and ends up trying to get more information out of Jerry by tricking him into a house showing and asking him lots of probing questions. Whether or not it was a lack of family values or the fact that Jerry thinks he was onto him, Jerry snaps and kills the doctor before realizing that he is his stepdaughter's doctor. Jim, the brother of the previous wife, gets closer and closer to the truth and even goes to his realtor office to find more information, and Jerry, who feels more and more trapped, tries to figure out his next identity as this family is no longer working out. Again here, the plot is completely different than reality. Although you can't blame them as the entire ordeal wasn't discovered, that is, John List wasn't discovered and caught until 2 years after the movie came out. The fact that anything here even remotely resembles the truth is pretty crazy. John List never killed again after he killed his family, and nobody suspected him at all until America's Most Wanted put out an episode on him, and even showed what he would look like now 17 years later. In addition to this, no family members ever came hunting after him. John List wrote a complete confession and left it with his priest to try to absolve himself of his crimes. Feeling the pressure of his new life crumbling, Jerry takes a ferry to a new town and tries to woo a new woman to make another perfect family, while Jim gets the confirmation he needed that Jerry is in fact Henry and rushes to go take him out. Jerry gets home and is confronted by Susan after she called the office, and he slips on his own name, giving us the absolute best line in the movie where he asks out loud who he is here.
Wait a minute. Who am I here?
Jerry attacks Susan and locks her downstairs while Stephanie gets home and gives us, quite honestly, one of the most gratuitous shower scenes of all time. Jim enters the fray and is quickly dealt with by Jerry, who then goes after Stephanie. A chase all over the house and attic ensues until finally Jerry falls through the floor and Stephanie tries to escape for good. Susan, crawling up the stairs, shoots Jerry a couple times before Stephanie stabs him to finish the job. The surviving women cut down the birdhouse to symbolically end what they literally ended earlier. Well, they've been a little off the path, but hey, they didn't know what had actually happened as John List wasn't apprehended yet. John didn't marry a year after the tragic events, nor was he feeling the pressure to look for a third wife. He was happy to have just found someone, and was also happy to be working as an accountant. The police weren't actively hunting him, but had theories. The time of his disappearance happened at the same time as the famous D.B. Cooper case, so there was thoughts that he may have been involved there as well, and killing his family was a way to cover his tracks and lead the authorities away.
Now tonight's first case, the oldest we've ever pursued on America's Most Wanted.
America's Most Wanted ran a special on the List murders and even had a clay bust made from a forensic scientist on what he would look like today. Oddly, List was a big fan of the show and was even impressed by how well the bust resembled him, although he wasn't worried about getting caught at the time. 2 weeks later, however, List was arrested after his neighbors recognized him and connected the dots and called the cops. Even though the police had scars, match-up, and fingerprints that said Bob Clark was John List, he denied it until eventually relenting and admitting guilt. List wasn't killed by his would-be new family, but instead stood trial where the whole country got to see the whole story. A court psychologist diagnosed List with obsessive-compulsive disorder and said, quote, "In his mind, his only 2 options were to accept welfare or send his family to heaven," unquote. Unfortunately, he chose the latter. It would also come out in court that in addition to the financial troubles, List's wife would often berate him and embarrass him in public and struggled with alcoholism. Clearly deranged, he also said that he never committed suicide because it would keep him from getting to heaven to see his family once again. List died in prison at the age of 82 of complications from pneumonia in 2008, but Jerry Blake would go on to get 2 sequels and a remake. The character in the movie and the man in real life were both delusional in their own ways, but apart from the opening scene of the remains of his family, the movie took way more liberties than most. Again though, this can be somewhat forgiven as they made it before the full story came out, and you gotta sell movies somehow, right?
I'm taking care of it.